We are going to begin our meeting with Rusty. So Rusty, take it away.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Rusty LaGrange, and most of you know that I have written a book. Microphone is not the muzzle of a gun. And it's the best tool I could think of to share with everybody. I don't know if many of you have read it, but in the book, I highlight a lot of the things that make interviewing situations more comfortable and more successful. And the first thing I wanted to share is that you need to learn how to use your tools. We have so many tools available to us: microphones, tape recorders, cell phones, hidden cameras. I mean, everything is out there now. And if you don't use your tools, especially to get the most comfort out of your interview, you're working harder than you need to. So first off, figure out what your tools are, and also be more comfortable with using your own tools so that when you are interviewing, you won't be stuck without batteries or a pen that doesn't work because you're taking some notes, a camera dies on you, whatever. Make sure you have your tools and the backups that you need to make it successful for you. The other thing is to assess your subject or your person. If you're doing a lot of memoir work and you're collecting stories to fill your book from a family position where you're talking to a lot of family members over time, it's always difficult to control the conversation, because once you start an older person reminiscing, it's really hard to control them or redirect them. It's not a professional interview like you would if you were talking to a politician or a man on the street interviews, whatever it is. When you're talking to a relative or a extended person in the family, getting them to be comfortable is your number one goal. So if you're face to face at a table, be sure that there's a Kleenex box available, something to drink for both of you. Make sure that the recording device is introduced to the person. Make sure they understand it's going to be on during the whole conversation. And if they fight you about that, you can always just say, okay, we won't need to use the recorder this time. I'll just take notes. So be sure you're ready for that too. And a lot of times, unless you really know the person that you're speaking to, unless you're really comfortable with them, you may have to prompt them to give you stories that you're leading with for that collection. So, for instance, you might want to talk about an uncle who's passed away and they don't want to talk about him. So, okay, back off, find another relative that can fill that void in the storyline. In the meantime, you let them tell you what's best for them. And once they're talking and you're getting good conversation, then at that time you might be able to redirect them. But they've got to start giving you the information, and it needs to be from their perspective. How are you going to get the information from them and capture it? And so as you're starting to warm up to this person and the comfort zone is widening, maybe you're on your second cup of coffee, now you have to decide, okay, how long is long enough to actually interview this person? Maybe you should do it several times if you can over a time period. So you can maybe only talk to them for an hour at a time and call it quits, say thank you, go on your way, reestablish the communication later on, let's say a couple of days, a couple of weeks, whatever it is. And if it's in their schedule, it makes them more appreciative for the time that you're taking to talk to them. If you put them on your schedule, it may not work out, and you can cause more tense situations among the family even. You never know. So those are some things to consider. So like I say, comfort is number one, but your goal is to get as much information that you can use for your book, your memoir, your script, script, whatever you're working on. And the comfort zone can be, what would you say, interfered with, hoped. Sometimes you go ahead and ask questions that may not be as comfortable, because sometimes you just want to shake it up a little bit and see how they respond. And that's okay. And if you fail at that, don't do it again with that person. But if something triggers something in their conversation and you just have to follow it, then try it. See if you can get them to step out of their comfort zone a little bit so that you'll have maybe some fresh information, a different perspective, a story that never popped up before that you're grabbing and say, whoa, never heard of that one before. Can we pursue that? And sometimes it's just the odd question that you throw at them that makes them perk up and think about something. Like, for instance, when's the first time you caught a fish? Well, if they've never been fishing, then that would preclude the other questions, of course, but it also would prompt you to go after the reason why they never went fishing. So you think fishing would be a perfect pastime. And on the other swing of that is, I won a fishing championship back in '09, and I mean the other 9. So you can, follow that up and maybe see what that interview angle might bring to you to bring more colorful story into the background of that man or woman. So these are all tactics that you can explore. And like I said earlier, if all else fails and the comfort zone is just not working for you, you can always resort to taking notes. Go back to the old-fashioned way and tell them, I'm just going to do old school. I'm going to take some notes. And that might be the easiest way to go. Now, it forces you to remember how to take notes. And I hope you do that and don't rely on your tools all the time, because as has happened with me, my battery died, my phone wasn't working. I had to go back to old school and take paper notes, so yeah. So that's pretty much my my presentation. I wanted you to know that my book is full of all sorts of tricks and tips and ways to deal with interviewing and taking notes, facing a person with a mic or having a mic shoved in your face, turn around, fair play, and interviewing for jobs. I mean, it has all sorts of aspects in it, and hopefully they'll apply to any of your interviewing situations coming up. So thank you. Do we have any questions? Oh, good. Okay, next.
One of the things that I like about Rusty and she's kind of inspired me in this is that Rusty wrote her book and she had her focus, but as she has mentioned in her Inkslinger articles, she's always looking for new places where her skills and her teaching fits. So, with the DCB project, the memoir project, her skills came totally into play with that. And like she just said with interviews, same thing. So she inspires me in terms of where else can I use these skills? And it's always great marketing to find new places where your skills are appropriate. So let's all give Rusty a hand and thank her for sharing with us.
Thank you.
And next up is the amazing Mary Thompson. Mary, you have to unmute yourself and you are up.
Oh, good morning. Good job, Rusty. And Rusty is a Poemsmith. We have changed our name to the Poemsmiths of the Mojave High Desert so that people will know where we are in the future. Lorelei is also here. She's a Poemsmith too. And anybody else here that's a Poemsmith? Because at the end, you can help me out if I leave anything out. Poetry. I keep being asked by someone who is present, what is a poem? And last night, I came across a quote by Emily Dickinson, which I think really says it all. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. That's a pretty high standard. So those of you who are writers of other genres, if I feel when I read your work, even a sentence or a paragraph, that the top of my head is being taken off, then you're a poet too. But here are some things that I want to tell you if you want to be a poet. I don't know if any of you saw the Carole King special the other night with James Taylor. She writes her own songs, has been doing it for years. And she said when the muse doesn't come looking for her, she goes looking for her muse. So there are prompts out there. There are different forms of poetry that you can try. And I believe that everybody can be a poet. So if you're just starting out, here are some things to think about. Try free verse. The beat poets of the 50s freed us from those traditional forms. Are they still around? Yes. And they're wonderful. And you can go to them. But if you're just starting out to be a poet, try free verse, which means no intentional rhyming. And I think what I've come to learn is that rhyming is harder than free verse because all the good rhymes are taken up. June, moon, all of those. You can't rhyme with orange. You spend half your time trying to find the rhyming word, and you're missing the whole concept of the poem. It is difficult. If you want to try rhyme, I might suggest trying the sonnet form. And then also read a lot of poetry. With the judging that we're doing for the Scholastic, this time, I'm reading all of them out loud. And boy, does that make me think. This youngster or this student is trying to do rap here, then they lose the rap, then they're trying to do more sophisticated something, then they're trying to fit their theme, then they're going back to the rap, and it really makes me see that they're not a 10. In my head, they all start out with a 10 when I start to read. But when I read it out loud, it makes that judging so much easier for me. And I really haven't done that in the past. So that's something you might want to think about. First of all, just like with any writing, you need to get your rough draft down. If you have a strong feeling or there's a line that resonates with you, maybe even out of someone else's work, just put that line down and go from there. Do the free flow, do the brainstorming, and just get something down there so that you have something to work with. Then later you can divide it up into lines and see if it's working. Sometimes I think there's so much to say in something that this isn't going to be a poem. It's going to be a flash fiction or it's going to be a short story because I can't quit, because poetry is compressed language. So also your words. And in one workshop, somebody told me, don't end. And I had noticed, because I read a lot of poetry, that a lot of poets were ending with the word and then going into the next line. And I was doing that, but I didn't really know why. And that person told me your poem will be much stronger if you have a strong word at the end of each line. So I've started to do that. And I don't think I use and at the end of a line anymore, even though some poets like to do that. So the strong words at the end of a line. Eliminate a lot of adjectives and adverbs. That makes it too flowery. Poetry is compressed language. But every once in a while, especially in your last line, you might want to put an adjective before your last word or an adverb somewhere, but concentrate on strong verbs, just like in all good writing. What I see when people come at the beginning of the Poemsmiths and when they write beginning poems are these obscure words. Not really obscure, actually they're too common or obscure actually. Words like soul, words like heart, get those out of there. They're abstract, they're overused. William Carlos Williams' definition of poetry: there is no poetry but in things, objects. And he of course has his wheelbarrow poem that's anthologized all the time, The Red Wheelbarrow. So look at objects, and I think this is something that I, as an English teacher, learned to do. I like symbols, I like rituals, I see meaning in common objects. And that's what the poet does. They notice their surroundings. For instance, today is a special day for a family member of mine, and that person is gone. So I go outside to get my morning newspaper. There's no morning newspaper. My tree is in the living room. It's got all its decorations off, but it sure is ugly sitting there naked. And I mean, I feel like I should toss it out and think, oh, this is a great day, a great beginning to my day with all these symbols of emptiness around. And yes, that's not a happy poem if it becomes a poem, but it's a thought that will help me deal with the emptiness of someone not here. So poetry can be therapy. Poetry can be expression. It can express awe. It's almost difficult to talk about because it's such its own genre. So metaphors and similes, read a lot of poetry, a lot of other people's poetry. Some you will not like, some you will not even get to the end of the poem. You'll think, oh my gosh, I don't even know what they're talking about here. And some of the scholastic kids' poetry is really obscure. You know, they're getting at the theme, maybe it's invisibleness or feeling estranged as an immigrant or something like that, but they're not being concrete enough. They're not using any metaphors, any imagery, any of that. So just read and write a lot of poetry. And at some point, you'll want to start submitting. And I can't tell you when. You'll know when you feel your poem is ready. And join a group. I mean, our Poemsmiths help each other. I learn as much from them as they do from me. Sometimes they'll say, I don't know what you mean by this line here. And then you realize it is too obscure. Or sometimes they'll say, well, you seem to be saying this, and that's not what you meant at all. That's not what you intended. So a group of fellow writers in any genre is just so important. Okay, so some of the things I said last year, if I have time left, do I, Mike? Do you have a little time? Jenny asked me a couple of years ago, for some guidelines for the judges of one of the anthologies for poetry. And she already had some things down that were really good, but we tweaked them together. So these are some of the things that constitute good poetry, which was the title of this presentation anyway. Is it aesthetically pleasing? And I had a college text called Sound and Sense, and I still have it because that's the essence. Your poetry should have good sound and make some sense. Strive toward universality. So C.S. Lewis is the one that said, when you meet somebody and you find out after talking to them, oh, you too have had that experience, you're friends. And you want to strive for some universality in poetry. Maybe that's why there's so much love poetry out there. Everybody's lost a love or been in love. And so that resonates with people. But try to say something that a lot of people can relate to. So that means don't keep it too personal or too specific. If you don't have punctuation, let there be a reason for it. Maybe there's wordplay. Maybe you've combined two words together. Then have there be a reason for it. Maybe you do just want to be clever, or it just occurred to you when you thought, oh, that's a new word. I've invented it. And you want to put it in there. Have a reason for it. Have a reason for no comma, no period, or taking one line and doing what's called enjamming, making it flow into the next line. Make sure if you do rhyme that it doesn't feel contrived. And that's another reason why rhyming poetry is harder than the other, because, and I've noticed this with some of the scholastic kids, it's contrived. They rhymed, well, you'll hear it in songs if you listen to songs, but the music covers it up. And so they get away with it all the time. They even get away with bad grammar between you and I, between you and me. They can change it, it doesn't matter. But with poetry, have a reason if your grammar is off. And then at least one poetic technique should be evident, such as there should be a simile or a metaphor, and when you think of rhyme, try to think of internal rhyme. Are there words inside in the middle of the line that in the middle of the word in the middle of the line, they rhyme and sound good? That's called assonance. And so try to have one of the techniques, alliteration, a lot of S's or a lot of some of the symbols, but it should go along with your meaning also. And something that we started to look for, and it's not in every single poem in Poemsmiths, was a turn in the poem. So for instance, 3/4 of the way through your poem, is there a turn? You're talking about something and then all of a sudden you turn it to what your meaning is going to really be. And some poets say, Billy Collins says this, let the poem go where the poem wants to go. And sometimes that's true. It does kind of go, but that will be in your rough draft, in your first reading, I would think. And then if you want to change it, you always can. But first, let it go where it wants to go in that brainstorming part where you're getting the poem down. Does the poem flow? Is your word choice clear? Do you have a reason for every single word? Because remember, poems are short, they're compressed. Is there some kind of overall impact? At the end, especially, does somebody say, aha, or I've been there, or that's a different way of looking at things, or wow, I never really thought about that. And originality, like I said, is there a word like soul? And for a long time, I didn't use the word heart. Occasionally I do, but that's a really common one also. So look for those words that it seems like every beginning poet likes to use. And just in the end, does it seem like it's complete? Like I can't revise it anymore. This is what I want to say. This is what the poem wants to do. So this is it, pretty much. And then your poemsmiths or your group or your fellow poets will tell you, well, I might change this, or I might use another word here, or did you really mean to say this? And they will help you in the end. And then just start submitting. And if you're going to get rejected, I've had, well, what I call my signature poem. I'm wearing my wishbone today. My wishbone in Moonglow poem has been published 6 or 7 times. And it's been rejected also. So when I send it off, I think, oh, this will probably fit their theme, or they'll probably like this. Sometimes, So you kind of have to accept that. And poetry is subjective. It didn't speak to some people. Every poem is not going to speak to everyone. So keep that in mind and just keep submitting. And I think every one of our poemsmiths has been published. And it's by repeatedly submitting, maybe relooking at it when it is rejected, and sending it out again. Okay, any questions, or my poemsmiths, anything you want to add that I might have left out? Rusty?
Actually,
Um,
Mary, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have to
Okay.
we have to close and move on. And maybe Rusty can talk to you privately later, but
Okay,
we're going to move on to Michael Raff. Everybody buckle your seatbelts, turn on your lights, make sure all your lights are on in your house. And you have the floor, Michael. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I would like you to brace yourselves and get comfortable, but relax, okay? But not too relaxed, because you're going to have to stay alert to get out of this one. I'm peering into my crystal ball. See? To give you information on how to write horror and the benefits of that genre. I wrote some notes last night, but I went into this really strange trance. Discovered that my notes were written in Romanian with tomato soup and a Gothic text that I could not read. Besides that, I kept trying to bite Joyce on the neck. Now I have to ask you, please don't be frightened. What I'm about to say won't harm or offend you. You won't even get nightmares unless you fall asleep during my presentation. As for myself, I don't get scared anymore. After writing horror stories all these years, I become desensitized. Oh my God. It's just a census taker at my door. I thought it was a flesh-eating zombie. Now, what was I saying? Oh yeah, I don't get scared. Well, maybe I do get scared once in a while, okay? But here goes. So now here's the first part of my presentation, the bloody truth about writing horror. Horror is pretty much the same as writing any fictional story. Sharp dialogue, realistic characters, and intriguing narratives. All elements of good writing must be present. But there's an additional component which makes horror writing even more challenging. The story must be scary. For horror stories to give readers a suitable amount of goose flesh, the author has to establish a sense of fear. My cat is bugging me, I'm sorry. There are several types of fear, like the fear of heights, for example. But the horror writer must generate what is known as a universal fear. Majority of people have a fear of being in a dark, isolated location. As I endeavored in perhaps my scariest story, Bed 13. No one wants to work in a state hospital all through the night, not even me. by putting the reader in that particular situation certainly gave bed 13 a creepy edge. Also, just about everyone identifies with the fear of dying. And this concept is very important in horror as well as in other genres. Then there's snakes, rats, spiders, and other creepy crawlers, which can give just about anyone the shivers. Also, there's a fear of the unknown. For my very first horror story, The Door, Tommy Stockton knows there's something behind a locked door, something evil. But he doesn't discover what it is until the end of the story. Knowing something horrifying is just around the corner, but not knowing what it is a surefire technique in creating what I refer to as the fear factor. The horror writer explores the malevolent and the inexplicable. Using a proper atmosphere, they arouse fear by building a heightened sense of suspense. Just as in other genres, the horror writer manipulates the reader's emotions. They have to employ a lot of realism to make up for the narratives that are not grounded in reality. As a successful writer builds suspense, they employ longer sentences. For action sequences, they employ short, brief sentences. There's a myth about suspense that's confused with being scared. I think suspense is a tool for the majority of writers to keep the reader turning pages. It's also used in thrillers, mysteries, historical dramas, biographies, some poetry, and even in romance. Take Romeo and Juliet, for instance. I lost my place. The element of suspense, which is this, as many other cases, overlaps with conflict. If Romeo merely met Juliet and they fell in love and got married, there wouldn't be any suspense or conflict, and it wouldn't be as interesting. Instead, their families hated one another, creating conflict in the narrative and causing suspense for the reader. Because the plots of horror stories are often improbable, the author needs to construct their characters, dialogue, and setting with as much realism as possible. Author Shirley Jackson attained total realism with her short story, The Lottery. Everything appeared normal at a small town gathering until a lottery is held and an unlucky woman gets stoned, and not in a nice manner either. While writing fiction, a compelling imagination is essential. When writing horror, a compelling weird imagination is vital. I write all types of fiction and nonfiction, but due to the way my mind is wired, the horror genre has enticed me into its creepy web. All those scary movies, Stephen King novels, and staying awake when I was a kid, agonizing about the boogeyman in my closet, has paid off. Then there's humor in horror. The best example of that is a scene from the movie Jaws. When the sheriff is pitching some chum into the water to attract a shark, he says something like, "Why don't you come over here and pitch this nasty word," right? The audience laughed. The shark makes a totally unexpected visit and people end up screaming and getting scared. I like using humor in my writings as an alternate to building suspense, which for me is a lot quicker and easier. Now, part two, the benefits of writing horror. Just about everyone knows who Stephen King is. He's perhaps the most well-known living author, having published at least 79 books and completing 19 screenplays. His publishers have sold over 350 million books. My point, one of our most successful writers is a horror writer. Therefore, it's a very lucrative genre. As I have mentioned, I used to be a dramatic story writer, and sometimes I still am. Our latest anthology, Unforgettable, contains two of my non-horror stories, Donnie Sharp and the Salvation of Edward Wilson. These stories would not have been as good without my writing horror, because not only did I have to hone my skills in plot and character development, good writing mechanics and everything else, I had to make my stories scary, mainly by using suspense. Writing horror is challenging if you can write good horror, you can write just about anything except maybe for poetry. Now that's really hard. If you're absolutely dying to sink your teeth into writing horror, here are 13 prompts. 1, imagine a scene from a nightmare comes true the next day. A scary doll comes to life. Now I use that concept in my second horror story, War Paint. 3, your friends start to disappear and no one else notices. You're inhabited by a ghost that controls you and makes you do crazy things. You have no reflection in the mirror. A fortune teller reveals that you are evil. So what else is new? Someone follows you home and it's your exact double. You find a diary that tells the future. Every time you wake up, you're a different person. You know someone is watching you day and night from the house across the street. While reading a scary book, you realize you're a character in it. Someone is living in your mirror. And finally, number 13, you finally meet your child's imaginary friend, who turns out to be a serial killer. Thank you for your attention, everybody. That's it.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mike? Anybody have a question? I do. Mike, can you turn off the scary music?
Yeah.
Okay, kind of freaking me out there a little bit. Okay, Jenny Margotta is up next. Jenny needs very little introduction. Jenny has made such a big difference to all of us. And you guys don't, not everybody on this screen gets to see what Jenny does in the club for our board and in the background, but she is a real powerhouse, a real pillar in this club. So I am turning over the microphone to her.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you today about writing believable dialogue. And according to my mother, I discovered my voice very, very early in life. And once I discovered that voice, I have not shut up since, which I guess makes me an expert on talking. And that's all dialogue is. It's talking on paper. So I've put together a real quick PowerPoint. It's kind of hard to compress it into 15 minutes, but I will try. Let's see here. There you go. All right. There are 3 keys, what I think are 3 keys to writing believable dialogue. The first one is you want to write like people talk. The second one is you need to fit your dialogue to the particular character who is doing the speaking. And the third one is a little bit more technical. It has to do with where you put your dialogue tags and the use of them and whether or not to use them, because you don't always need a dialogue tag. So let's talk first about write like people talk. Some of the suggestions that might help you is go out and actually listen to people. Go sit in the mall when things open back up again and you can, and just listen to the conversation around you. And maybe even close your eyes and try to judge, gee, is this person a teenager, or are they, in their 60s, or, is maybe English their second language, those kinds of things, and actually get a feel for how people talk in real life. Stop and think about how you personally would say something. And then think about how your character would talk. Those of us who write fiction, we always try to have some kind of a quick backstory for our characters. So think about how your character might express something. And also read your dialogue aloud. Does it sound natural when you read it aloud? I can't tell you how many times I've edited dialogue and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is not how somebody would talk. And this is just a really, really quick example of something like that. I wrote, do you really think that's all I care about? Wrong. I care about lots of things. This is just one of them. Or would I write, do you really think that is all I care about? You are wrong. I care about a lot of things. This is just one of them. Well, the first one with the contractions and just the one word wrong, not you are wrong. Those kinds of things, the natural flow is what you're looking for when you're trying to put it on paper. And then we want to talk about fit your dialogue to your character. This one's a little bit more complex. We all know that age, ethnicity, geographical upbringing, regional idioms. See, and now there's a problem in my so what I get for doing this at 10 o'clock at night. Regional idioms, they all affect the way your character speaks. College professors and teenagers don't speak the same way or use the same vocabulary. Like I said before, is English your character's first language? The judicious use, and I stress judicious use of foreign words and altered speech patterns can give your characters an added layer of believability. You don't want to do, particularly with someone who maybe has a speech impediment or has trouble speaking at all, you don't want to do every word they speak in that kind of a difficult to read speech pattern, because if you do that too much, you're going to lose your readers. So I've just given you some real quick examples of maybe the different speech patterns of different people. A 6-year-old girl might say something like, fairies don't come out during the daytime, you know. They're afraid of the light. Shh, that last part's a secret. I'm not supposed to tell. But a valley girl, teenager, is likely to say, OMG, this is just so totally dope. Whereas a college professor speaking to an associate might say something like, I rather thought, in as much as you were nearby, that it might engage your interest. I've read your work, of course, and it is a privilege to meet you. Now, Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot, she takes just the word the, and just in her placement of the word the in his dialogue, lets you know that English is not his first language. And he always says, the Inspector Japp, that's the police guy that he has an association with. He says, the Inspector Japp, he is most concerned with this case, is he not? Or he'll say something like, the gentleman, he must not keep waiting the lady. So very, very simple things like that let you know that English is not what he learned to speak with. These are all things that I've taken from actual books, by the way. Someone who maybe you want to put a foreign word here and there. You want to be very careful about when you use a foreign word. You don't want to, and I've seen so many writers do this, they use the foreign word and then in parentheses right after it, they tell you what it means. Well, you wouldn't speak it that way. So you don't want to put it in your dialogue that way. If you want to do it in the narrative, that's okay, but you don't want to do it in your dialogue. So you need to find a way to let your readers know, either through action or another character or some way to explain what that word is. And this is one from a writer by the name of Aaron Elkins. And he says, this husband of yours, sometimes this fancy dancy anthropological theories get a little unskapachket. You know unskapachket? Julie shook her head. Screwed up, Gideon murmured. His years of friendship with Abe had taught him a great many Yiddish expressions, by osmosis, as it were. I said, and they listened, Abe continued, but what do they care? With now they're concerned. So it very, very easily found a way to explain what the word Untitled meant without stopping the flow of the story. And that's really important in your dialogue. You don't want to stop the reader's flow of the story. You don't want to pull him out of it for an explanation or a definition or something that keeps him from continuing with that story. Because the whole idea of reading a story, at least to me, is that you want to get lost in it. You want to get so caught up in the story that after a while you're going, whoa, 2 hours have gone by and I didn't realize where I was because I've been out in this world of this new story. And also there are a geographical dialect. And here again, you can use it, but you don't want every single word to be that way because it does get kind of tedious to read after a while. But this is just an example of a geographical dialogue with some idioms. There weren't but a few windows, and they was up near the ceiling and covered with something that didn't let no air or sunlight in. And the woman crying seemed to use up what little air was left. By the time they called my name, I was panting like a hunting dog that's been run too long in the field. So you get a real feeling for what maybe the lack of education that this particular speaker had and those kinds of things. Then very, very quickly then let's move on to dialogue tags. They seem to really be a problem with so many of my dialogue writers. I have some writers who dearly love to put every single dialogue tag at the beginning. And to me, that really affects the flow of the story. The idea of a dialogue tag really is just to let your reader keep track of who's talking. So if you don't need one, don't put it in there. If you've just got a conversation going on between two people, a lot of times you don't need that extra tag in there. He said, he said, he said. One school of thought also says that you only ever use the word said. And I seriously disagree with that. There's two sites that I go to. I've listed them down here. I've given you the websites for them, 100 synonyms and 350 other words. I don't use all of them, obviously. I do like to use the word asked when it's a question. I quite often like to say replied or admitted. Very, very simple. I use maybe a dozen different words for said. Don't get so creative that that you use all 350 of them, because that's going to kind of disrupt your story too. Robert B. Parker only ever used the word said, and he's a master at dialogue, and I never really realized how intrusive that word was until I started listening to his books on audio files. And after a while, that said for every single line of dialogue, whether it's a question or a comment or whatever, to me, it got to the point where I could hardly listen to the story. So change it up a little bit, but try not to get real creative about it. It is sometimes appropriate to put the tag at the beginning, but generally they're better placed in the middle or at the end. And like I said, you want to keep it simple. I've got a real quick last little example of this. Here's the first one. Burden said. So what's the next step, doctor? Holly didn't seem to have too many interests. The doctor said, you're thinking I isolated her for some ulterior motive? Burden said, no, just trying to get a picture of the way she lived. Well, that to me is very intrusive. The said, it interrupts the flow of the story. I think it sounds a whole lot better to say something like, so what's the next step? Burden asked. Holly didn't seem to have too many interests. You're thinking I isolated her for some ulterior motive? Burden shrugged. No, just trying to get a picture of the way she lived. You'll notice that I left out the dialogue tag for the doctor, either at the beginning, the middle, or the end. You've only got two people talking, and so you don't, because you change a paragraph, start a new paragraph when your new character speaks, we know that there's just two of them and it's back and forth. So you don't need that the doctor said. And I changed, then the third one, I changed it from just a simple dialogue tag, Burden said, to Burden shrugged, because oftentimes you can replace a dialogue tag with action and it lets the reader follow who's talking. But I don't need to say Burden shrugged and said, because Burden shrugged and then you start talking. It's the reader knows who it is that's talking. And also, you want to be very careful about, I harp on these two words all the time. You cannot smile several lines of dialogue. You can smile and then you can talk, but you cannot smile words. So smile is not a synonym for said. Some people will argue that laugh is not, and I say it is, except you can't laugh an entire sentence. You can laugh a single word. You can say something like, right, she laughed. That you can do, but you can't laugh an entire complete sentence. I mean, try it, you can't do it. So you have to stop and think about your tags. Can you really, a lot of people would have, he shrugged, comma, and continued to talk. Well, no, he shrugged is action. It's not a tag. So it's he shrugged, period. That's your action. And then you start talking. He shrugged is not a tag, it's action. So you have to stop and think from a technical standpoint. Tags are generally you continue your dialogue either before, after, in the middle, whatever, with commas when you're adding a tag. When you're adding action, then it's separate. So you take a period. That kind of gets into things a little bit more, but the key is to stop and think when you're writing dialogue. The only thing dialogue is talking on paper. If you wouldn't say it that way in real life, if you wouldn't hear somebody out in the world talk that way or laugh an entire paragraph, then don't write it that way. Dialogue is talking on paper. That's all it is. So keep it very, very natural, keep it very simple, and just remember you don't want to pull your reader out of your story by unnecessary tags and directions and definitions and those kinds of things. Just keep it very, very natural. And I ask if anybody has questions.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Jenny, have you seen any books, commercially published novels or whatever kind of book, where you have the dialogue tag at the beginning of the sentence?
Yes. And it
Really?
drives me insane.
I wouldn't think they would make it to the publishing desk.
It does. And it's just, and there are some there. I looked it up online and it did say that dialogue tags can be placed at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. So I think sometimes it just maybe it depends on how you're doing it. I'm thinking, like, if you ask me, and I'm writing this out, let's say you ask me a question, and as I'm writing, I would say, she paused and replied, comma, yada, yada, yada. In that respect, then yes, the replied would maybe go in as a tag in the beginning, because the pause is the action, and then you're tacking a tag onto it. She paused and replied, comma. So in that sense, it makes sense to put the dialogue tag in the front, but you have to kind of stop and think about how it is that you're doing it. If it's just straight with no action involved, just back and forth, I personally, and of course it's just my opinion, but I personally think they're much, much less obtrusive in the middle or at the end.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we're gonna have to move on. I did want to point out, it's fascinating what you said, Jenny, because I read this book just recently by Dan Brown, and he does exactly what you said not to do all through the book. He has a section here where he says, the German's eyes went wide. Was tust du? He demanded. And then right afterwards it says, what are you doing? In quotation marks. So all through the book, he translated all the foreign language all through the book. And I thought, well, that's an interesting way of doing that. But I appreciate your comments.
Just because an author is mass published does not mean there are not mistakes in their book. One of the reasons I've gone to a lot of audiobooks is because when I read paperbacks, I stop and edit them and I think, wait a minute, this is James Patterson. He should know better than that. So yeah.
Rusty, real quick, go ahead.
Yeah. I want to know why authors use semicolons and or commas before they use the dialogue. How's that play? What's the difference?
The semicolon before a dialogue is wrong. I can't tell you why it would be there.
Now, what about just a colon?
Well, some people do it as a colon. It's a style issue. The British seem to like to use colons a lot more than American authors too, but it's more of a style issue. Yeah, you can. North American English pretty much tends to use a comma when you're doing a dialogue tag. A lot of them do, and sometimes I've seen them use both. Churchill quoted colon and then the quote rather than Churchill quoted comma. So it's kind of a style issue.
Okay, we are going to transition to Roberta Smith. I saw recently that Mike, Raff, and Roberta Smith went to a conference in Pasadena and had a very successful book sale there, and got to interact with lots of people in the genre. So we welcome you, Roberta. You have the floor.
Okay, well, I have to share my PowerPoint. I'm using my husband's machine and he loves to leave windows open, so bear with me while I find my PowerPoint on here. Oh, it's right there.
Okay, you have to share
I
your
got
screen,
it.
Roberta.
There it is.
Good. There we
Okay,
go.
let me get up here. Okay, so I'm talking about screenwriting basics. And the first thing you have to do when you're going to write a screenplay is you've got to know, well, what's my story? You don't sit there and make it up as you begin. So the first thing you should do is write your log line, which is a single sentence that includes your protagonist, what your protagonist wants, and what conflict challenges the protagonist. So here's a couple of examples. Silence of the Lambs. In order to catch a serial killer who skins his victims, a young FBI agent must develop a relationship with a psychopathic serial killer. And my second example is from a screenplay that Mary Ruth and I collaborated on called Bereaved. And that second word is an Chickasaw word, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. Anyway, I won't. Widowed mother of 3 must discover why bereaved ghosts are increasingly demanding the attention of her 4-year-old son, drawing him to the haunted playground of a burned down orphanage that once stood on the property she inherited. So once you know what your story is, you're going to want to outline it. And so you write down the main events of your script in order. And there's a couple of ways I know to do it. You can just take a page and write down the scene by scene as you see it coming through. Sometimes, and I've done this before in some of the screenplays I wrote, is you can take index cards and you can write what scenes you know you need to tell your story. And when you do that, you can move and exchange, oh, I want this scene before that scene, if it makes sense to do that. So some people do that. The story, it's a basic structure. It's in 3 acts and you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is the setup, where you learn who the main character is and what this character wants. And something has to happen then to set the story in motion so the main character will start taking action. And you try to grab the reader in the first 10 pages of your story because you want them to read the whole thing. If they get bored or if they notice something wrong in the way you're writing it, you know, there's no reason for them to continue and they won't. So middle is usually, this is the lengthiest portion of the script. This is where you have a series of events where the protagonist is trying to accomplish whatever it is he's trying to accomplish, and then he gets hit with obstacle after obstacle that he has to overcome. And then something happens at the end of the middle that causes often what they call the dark night of the soul, where your character is like, oh no, all is lost, or I don't think I can get what I'm trying to get. But he decides to go forward in order to resolve whatever it is that's happening. The end, this obviously is the resolution of the story where the climax takes place. And either the protagonist reaches his goal or maybe he fails his goal, but something changes. This is the resolution. Something changed. The characters changed, whatever it is. So character biographies, I think this is really important. You need to know who your characters are. You need to know even the characters that aren't on screen. So I write biographies for every single one of the characters that's in the story. The main ones, the supporting ones, and even ones that are never seen on screen if they have impact on the characters we do see. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, don't worry. But this is an example from our script Bereaved, where the main character, Julie, I wanted to know what she looked like. Where was she raised? How old is she? Did she go to college? What did she study in college? What were her dreams for her life? Does she have any special talents? Did she have girlfriends? Does she have friends? Did she used to party? What kind of person was she? And how did she meet her husband? Because her husband's integral to the story. What was their relationship like? And why did she end up on the property where this orphanage was? Is she going to look for work now that she's living there? She has 3 kids in the story, and so how is that going to play out? So this, I wrote a character study, a bio for her husband, even though you never meet him in the story because he died. And I wrote, where was he raised? How old was he? What did he look like? What did he do for a living? And how did he die? And what were his aspirations? And did he love his wife? What was their relationship like? Did he love his kids? And did he have special talents? And how did he come to own the orphanage property? So all those questions are answered. And a lot of times when you create the biography for your character, things will pop up where you'll go, oh, that's really fascinating, and you'll want it to become part of the story. So, but you also don't mention everything that you write about them because that would just bog it down. So then you write a treatment or a synopsis, and this is a prose version of your outline. And it reads sort of like a short story. And it, you should include your beginning, your middle, and your end. Often when you're trying to sell your script, they'll want a synopsis of the story. They won't want to read your script. They'll say, well, I want to know what it's about. Send me a synopsis. So you need to tell the story in screenplay format. You need to show, not tell. You write it in present tense because think about it. When you watch a movie, you're watching it happen. So when you write your screenplay, you're telling it in present tense. She ran to the car, and you need to adhere to proper screenplay formatting. This is really important. If you don't do this, they won't look at your script. And also a screenplay is like a blueprint. So you're not going to write some big flowery description of a scene. You want to just say by the river, or, what if it's an important element, you'll include it, but it's a blueprint for them to build the movie. So you don't get flowery, you don't write it like a novel. So I'm including this example page from Bereaved. It shows you what screenplay format looks like. The industry standard is 12-point Courier font, 1-inch right margin, 1.5-inch left margin, 1-inch margin top and bottom. And then there are a lot of elements to it: scene heading, action line, the parenthetical, the transition, the voiceover. So here's an example: fade in, that's the transition, the scene heading, the action line. And then the character speaking, where you place the name of the character, how much below it you put the dialogues, you can see that it's indented. It also doesn't go to the end of the page. The action part here, Julie disconnects, that's an action line. That starts at the left. When I learned screenplay writing, I learned it in the 80s when people didn't have computers and you typed it on a typewriter. And so when I learned it, it was like, okay, it's this many spaces in, and that's where you start the person who's speaking name, and this many spaces in for the dialogue, and it's only this many inches where the dialogue stops. But I went looking for that. I mean, I could go dig out my old books and find it, but I found online, they don't even tell you that. The example for elements to proper formatting, he said, put the person's name almost center. I mean, it was very loose. It wasn't like this many spaces in. The easiest thing to do is to pay for a screenwriting software. And I bought Fade In with Mary Ruth because it's reasonably priced. And it makes it so much easier because there's things that happen when you're writing a screenplay. For instance, you're writing, you get to the bottom of the page, you have the action, and the action goes on to the next page. Well, at the bottom of the action on that one page, you write continued in parentheses. Well, if you change your screenplay in editing it, that action could go to the next page. Now you got to go look and say, oh, take out that continued. It doesn't belong anymore. It's very time consuming. So if you use screenwriting software, it formats for you, and it is really, really wonderful to have. So the final thing is to see how your screenplay reads. You might have a reading with friends. This is kind of fun to do. I've done this before. You get a number of people, you assign them a character, and then you can hear it like, oh, that sounds awkward, or that sounds good, or that's not working. And they'll also give you their feedback. Also, imagine you're the audience and picture the screen as you read your script, like as it flows. It's like, oh, well, that doesn't work, or that does work. And so you can identify problems or things you'd like to improve. And then, of course, you do your rewrites. And that is the end of my basics in screenplay writing. So.
Okay, do we have any questions? Any questions for Roberta?
I want to mention one thing that's fun about knowing how to write a little screenplay is you can write a trailer for your books that you write. Like I have done that. And then you find someone that can film it for you. So you can bring, you know, you may not make the whole movie, but you can make a little trailer for your story. And so it's fun to know how to write a little screenplay.
Roberta did it with my Tishomingo book, and it was great. The trailer.
Go ahead, Rusty.
Are there any differences in format between a film screenplay and a TV episode
Yes.
screenplay?
Yes,
I
there
know
is.
there's page requirements. Okay.
Well, also the way they put the name and where they write the dialogue, it is different. And Fade In is the screen software I wrote, and it has TV software with it, or playwriting software. That's also different. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Roberta. That was excellent. Katina, did you have a question?
I just had a comment. Basically, I brought the final draft. I've been working on one for years now, and had a lot of trouble putting it in the right format. So I bought that final draft. Going over it now, just doing it with that.
I think that's the most popular and industry standard.
Right.
So,
Okay. That's it.
All right, I do know that Jenny and myself, we would be more than happy if you have a screenplay that you want to test with friends. We would be more than happy to jump in on that. We like that. We like sitting around and taking on different parts and characters and things. I'm sure there's many others on this screen that would love to do that also.
That sounds
So-
like fun.
So count us in. Count us in.
Okay.
Okay, I am the last presenter today, and so I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see that. And
Oh, look at that.
I'm going to start from the beginning. Best place to start. All right, so I have entitled my presentation, Do the Twist. This is something I personally really like in stories. And so I, excuse me, so I've been doing a lot more thinking and researching about it. This is one of my online topics. R.L. Stein said there are 3 parts to every story, and I can't see it because my thing is there. Okay, every story ever told can be broken down into 3 parts: the beginning, the middle, and the plot twist. I thought it was funny when Roberta was talking about beginning, middle, and end, and I knew that was coming. So a twist is like a punchline of a joke. And I know when Dwight was telling his joke, we were all waiting for the punchlines, and they were good. They were something we didn't expect. That's what made them fun. So I found this one. A boy falls in love with his neighbor, but this happens every single time. The son goes to his dad, says, "Dad, I fell in love with the neighbor's daughter." And the father says, "Oh no, she's actually your sister." And the boy is sad. But a couple of months later, he comes back and says, "Dad, I fell in love with another neighbor's daughter." And the father says, "Oh no, she's also your sister." So he went to his mom crying and says, "Mom, I fell in love with 6 girls, but I can't date any of them because Dad is their father." And the mother hugs him affectionately and says, "You can date whoever you want. He isn't your father."
But a murderer.
So twist is like a punchline in a joke. It's something we're looking forward to. It's something that, we're always trying to figure out. Even when I was saying this, I know your minds were going, okay, what's going to be the thing? And you had your ideas, and some of you probably got it right, and you were laughing and feeling good that you got it right, and others were actually surprised. So before I begin, I just want to know if you have a favorite story twist. And let's take 2 of those. Any 2 people want to chime in with a favorite story twist from a story or a movie that you have seen, something you really liked?
The Sixth Sense, that was popular because people kept going back to see it because, some people guessed it, but a lot of people didn't. So I think that's one reason it was a big hit.
Yeah, and he told you right up front, "I see dead people," but you didn't realize till the very end what was actually happening. And then you want to see it again to see how he interacted with all the other characters throughout the movie to see if it actually holds up. No, that's a good one. Anybody else have one?
Let's see.
No, I'm not seeing everybody's picture, so if you have one, just chime in.
I do. The
Go ahead,
usual
Mike.
the usual suspects were the guy, he's handicapped and stuff. He turns out he's faking the whole thing, and he's the actual villain that you've heard about through the movie, but you'd never met. You find this out in the last 60 seconds of the movie. Terrific.
Yeah. And that's why we watch movies and why we read stories, because we want that experience at the end where you see everything differently than the way you thought it was in the very beginning.
2 examples, The Others and Fight Club.
Yes. Yes, and I know we could all give multiple examples. I have a bunch of examples in my full presentation, but I've truncated it for this today so that we can keep it short. So I'm going to look closely with you at the Wizard of Oz. My wife and I recently went to the Academy Museum that recently opened. They have a large room exhibit on the Wizard of Oz, and I highly recommend that you go. They require full vaccination and you have to wear a mask while you're there. But this one room, they had so much memorabilia. They had the tin can from the Tin Man. They had Dorothy's shoes. They had the two of the dresses that Dorothy wore, the Munchkin outfit, the witch's hat, the lion's costume. They had original script pages, which you could see some editing on, which made me happy. They had original concept art and a couple of the posters. So we're going to look at the Wizard of Oz, mostly the movie. So here's how you do a twist. And Mike is very familiar with this. First, you have to establish a normal world. And when we get to the Wizard of Oz, the movie, we see Dorothy, we see the context she's living in, the farm, her aunt and uncle, the farm hands. Everything is kind of brownish, sepia tone. She has a life very, very normal, a very normal world that she lives in. And then when everything changes, she goes to a different world. And what I'm always struck by, one of my favorite moments in any movie, is when Dorothy opens that door to Oz and everything is in color. The transition there is amazing. I think it's one of the best moments of any movie ever made. But look at the face. Look at Dorothy's face. She's left a world that was drab and brown and dusty and dirty, and they were in poverty and living on the brink. She opens the door to a world that is beautiful, colorful, but look at her face. She is not okay with this. This is the face of everything not being what you think it is. So she has stepped into a different world, a different reality, you might say. Then you have to ask yourself, what do the characters want and need? And this was brought up by Roberta also. You have Dorothy, she wants to get back to her home. You have the lion who wants courage, the Tin Man who wants a heart, the scarecrow who wants brains. This is what they all want. And then they're told Dorothy is told by Glenda that you're going to find this solution with the wizard. And Dorothy passes this wisdom along to all these new characters that she meets, and they're all going to go to the wizard, and the wizard is the one who's going to solve the problems. And then even in the book and in the movie, they make the wizard, his presentation, to be incredible. In the book, it's an actual head that is suspended from the ceiling. And in the movie, they even went further and made it this kind of apparition that hovers, that has this booming voice and this fire that explodes. And it gives you this sense of grandeur and power that the wizard really is the one that can solve all these problems. And then you get the first twist. And that's where Dorothy kills the witch. Not expected. She's running from the witch is chasing her, all of the guards are chasing the other characters. They all end up in the middle, and the witch looks like she has her moment of power, and she sets the scarecrow on fire. And Dorothy grabs a pail of water and throws it to put out the fire, hits the witch and kills her. Totally unexpected. First twist. Second twist, the wizard is a humbug. He has no power. He's just a guy behind a curtain. And you can see the anger and the frustration and the fury in the characters. But then he goes on to reveal, which something that we've seen through the whole movie, and that's that the characters already had what they needed. Every time there was a problem, it was the scarecrow who solved it. The lion showed great courage in going to save Dorothy. And every time there was a situation that was heartfelt, it came from the Tin Man. They've always had what they needed. Even Dorothy had what she needed in the shoes. But the third twist, and this is a twist that not many people see, unfortunately. That is the twist that Dorothy never left this bed. Now in the book is very different. In the book, Dorothy gets pulled by an actual tornado. The whole house is ripped off the foundation, carried over the deadly desert, and it lands on the Wicked Witch of the East. Dorothy interacts with all the characters in Oz, and then when she's at the end and Glenda tells her she's always had the power, she's wearing silver slippers. They sprout wings and they fly her over the deadly desert, and she lands back in Kansas. When she lands, she tumbles, the shoes fall off and disappear, and she never finds them again. In the movie, it's extremely different. In the book also, the only two characters in the beginning of the book are Henry and M. In the movie, all these characters are in the beginning of the movie, and that's very important, as well as Elmira Gulch, who becomes the witch. Dorothy, in the movie, has been experiencing an altered state of consciousness. Remember when she came home, she had first run away because Elmira Gulch had taken Toto, and Toto escaped, came back home. She decided she and Toto needed to run away. So they run away, they meet the guy that sells the potions and things and tells fortunes. She goes back home, but the tornado has already come, everybody's in the storm cellar. She ends up back in the house, and remember, the window pops off and hits her. When it hits her, she goes into an altered state of consciousness. She gets knocked unconscious. She's laying there on the floor, and all of a sudden she comes to, and she's in the room, but the room is flying. She looks out the window, and you can see she sees a bunch of really weird things. The guy that's rowing a rowboat, and this woman in a chair who's knitting. This is her mind trying to find some meaning out of her situation. And when she sees Elmira Gulch going by on her bicycle, that's the image she fixates on. Her imagination turns it into a witch, and she starts experiencing a whole different reality. None of it is real in terms of our reality, but it is very real in terms of her reality. She goes through the whole thing with Oz. She, in the end, she comes back to herself, her own reality. She wakes up out of her dream state, and you'll notice that she says she has to reorient herself. She says, "This is my room, and you are all here." So there's a transition back to the reality. So this is the third twist, and it's because of this man. This is the man that wrote the screenplay of The Wizard of Oz, Noel Langley. And he also wrote a book about Edgar Cayce and reincarnation. He was very much into the New Age movement and different alternative realities. So that's why we have the movie that we have instead of the actual story as it is. You'll see it. The twist is that Dorothy's never left the bed, but she's been experiencing an altered state of consciousness. Okay, he's the one that added the characters in the beginning because Dorothy has to have these characters as a point of reference, as we do in the audience. He added Elmira Gulch, and he also changed the color of the shoes because they didn't look good. Silver shoes didn't look good against the yellow in the color test that they did. Okay, so when you're creating a twist, first thing, make sure that everything is normal. Create a world that holds together, that makes sense. Have many key elements that go together, create a plausible construct in the mind of the reader. Second, come up with another reality that's as plausible, or if possible, even more plausible, but fits the exact same facts. That's the key. So I have one more example real quickly for you. The movie Coco. If you have not seen the movie Coco, you might want to close your ears because I'm gonna ruin the movie for you. But if you have seen it, you'll understand what I'm saying. In the movie Coco, you have this young boy, Miguel, and he comes to believe that his great-grandfather was Ernesto de la Cruz, the wonderful, amazing singer, the very famous singer. And he believes this because it fits the facts. Ernesto de la Cruz had a reputation being this great singer. Miguel loves music also. He gave up his life for his music. He gave up his family, and he went off and became this great musician. And that's what Miguel wants to do. He actually, they have a point where he says, I don't want to be a part of this family anymore. So he has that in common with his great-grandfather, Ernesto. And Ernesto's guitar is the same as the one in his grandmother's picture, Coco. Coco is his grandmother. And she has this picture, and you see this guitar, very unique guitar. And it's the same guitar that Ernesto de la Cruz used. Now, the actual photograph, the actual face of his great-grandfather has been torn out because since he had left his family, the family has been angry. They tore out his face, but they keep the great-grandmother's face in honor of her. But the twist is that this other character, Hector, who has been traveling with Coco in the land of the dead, he is actually the great-grandfather of Miguel. And the great-grandmother, Imelda, validates this. And in a flash, you get this whole change of reality where Ernesto de la Cruz is the bad guy. And his words take on a new meaning. Throughout the movie, you hear him saying, seize your moment. And that becomes Miguel's motivation. He's going to be like de la Cruz and seize his moment and become a great singer. And then you realize that seize your moment is what de la Cruz used when he killed Miguel's great-grandfather, Hector. He poisoned him, he killed him, he stole his songs, and he used them to become a great celebrity. So same exact facts, but they make even more sense when you see them through this different lens. So this is the wonderful thing about having a twist in your story. It makes your story memorable. It makes your story clever. It puts you above a person that just writes a straight story, but you do a story that is a lot more fun. So I end by saying creating a twist is one of the most fun things you can do in a story. Enjoy it, have fun with it, and I look forward to seeing what kind of things we all come up with. Okay, any questions?
No, but this is great.
Yeah, by researching this, I've found so many fun things in stories. And it's a lot of fun looking at stories this way, through this lens.
I have more of a comment.
Go ahead, Rusty.
It seems like the high-end animated shows, usually produced by Disney, have a really strong adult theme to many of them. And as writers, if you take the characters out of the storyline and just follow the actual bones of the story, what made them decide that it would be great as an animated movie instead of a real movie with real action people? That's what I always wonder about.
Yeah, and what's funny is that a lot of those animated movies now Disney is turning into live action movies. The Jungle Book and Lion King and these others. So yeah, sometimes they go the other direction. Okay, if we have no more questions, Mr. Norris, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Mike. I just want to, just a couple of comments, just observing this meeting, and I just realized you can never underestimate the depth and the talent and the sophistication of people in our branch. I'm always amazed And I really thank all of you for contributing in your own way to a meeting like this. This was a tremendous meeting.
Yeah.
This one, I hope it's recorded because we're gonna have a lot of, good, all right. Glad to see that. And I just want to say, I'm just so happy to be a part of this branch. You know, we started doing president's meetings for the 22 branches throughout the state. And I didn't realize how lucky I was. So I'm just really happy to be part of this group and the connections and friendships that I've made. It's just a beautiful thing. So thank you all for what you have contributed and continue to contribute to the success of this group, because we're doing some really good constructive things. And that's about all I have to say, Mike. Thank you.
All right, I think on that note, we can wish everybody a good day and keep writing, It's so much fun. And I love all the things that were shared today. It makes me feel like I'm ready to go back out there and do some more writing. Thank you all. Thanks for everybody that participated. Thanks for everybody that came, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Mike.